Participants, dear experts, thank you for taking the time today to join us for the panel discussion on the current situation with children with links to ISIS who are still being held in northeast Syria, and the efforts to repatriate and rehabilitate them. This panel discussion is hosted by the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovations. The Bulan Institute is a research institute based in Geneva, Switzerland, with a regional office in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Our mission is to promote peace, security, and human rights in Central Asia, Eurasia, and South Asia through research, advocacy, and dialogue. As of today, thousands of children remain stranded in northeast Syria. They are living in Al-Hol and Al-Raj camps, where the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. The United Nations has been urging states to act in the best interest of children by repatriating them immediately. While many countries have opted not to repatriate, we have seen Central Asian states take the lead by repatriating women and children. Some European states have also repatriated children, but only in a small number and under very specific circumstances. Many of these children are deeply traumatized and emotionally scarred from their experiences, and they will require welfare, additional welfare from the states and their repatriation. To help us understand the issues that they are facing and to provide us an insight into how the children in Al-Hol and Al-Raj are treated and how they are being repatriated, I'm honored to welcome our three speakers. Ms. Angela Mazer-Marshall is joining us from Amman, Jordan. Mr. Munir Mahmadzadeh is joining us from Tashkent, Uzbekistan. And Mr. Rustam Azizi is joining us from Dushanbe, Tajikistan. Thank you all for accepting our invitation and being with us today. We will move to the speakers to provide their insights on this matter. We will follow their presentations with a question and answer session. The experts will be asked the questions provided by our participants. If you have a question to ask, please let us know in the Zoom chat on the right-hand side of your screen. I would like to add that our session will be recorded to share with our partners on social media and will be posted on our website. To all participants, please keep your microphone and camera off for the entirety of the panel discussion. We will begin our discussion by talking with Ms. Angela Mazer-Marshall, Child Protection Technical Advisor for Save the Children. Save the Children is an international NGO focused on securing children's rights through programming, emergency responses, and advocacy. It is one of the most reputable child's rights organizations in the world, and we are honored to have a representative from their organization to come and talk with us today. Ms. Marshall has over a decade of experience in working in child protection, having worked with the UNDP, CARE, Global Kids, and the International Rescue Committee. Thank you for being here, Ms. Marshall. Could you help provide us with the necessary context for our discussion and explain what the current situation on the ground is in Al-Hol and Al-Raj? How many children remain there and what are their living conditions? After that, could you please enlighten us on the role that Save the Children is playing in northeast Syria and how it's cooperating with governments regarding repatriation?
Great. Thank you so much, Cooper, and thank you all for joining today and being part of this really timely discussion. I am going to turn off my camera so that I can share my slides. Just one moment. And if you can confirm that you can hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. The slide should be coming up here. How does that look?
It looks fantastic, at least from my end.
Okay, wonderful, great. So yes, I just really also want to thank the Bulan Institute for convening this important discussion. And as mentioned, my remarks will really focus on the situation of foreign children inside northeast Syria, girls and boys from every region of the world born to foreign mothers or fathers who have links to ISIS in Syria. And I'd like to open with just a very short video to give you a sense of what life is like in northeast Syria for foreign families. It's just under a minute. I hope you can all see that. Okay. So on the screen, and I hope everybody can see this, is a quote from a young woman named Dilber, who's from Azerbaijan. And she was 18 years old when we met her and her young son in a tent in Inisa camp in 2018. Dilber was brought to Syria when she was 13, along with 2 younger siblings. Her father was executed and she was sent to Raqqa to marry a 22-year-old ISIS fighter. She described being a child still skipping rope when she became pregnant at 14. And as her quote starkly illustrates, Dilber witnessed unimaginable violence and horror. Shortly after her son's birth, she was widowed and forced to marry a second husband. Eventually reunited with her siblings, Dilber and her child ended up in Inisa camp. And Dilber's story is not the exception. It's the lived experience for many of the foreign families and children stuck in Northeast Syria today. And any discussion must recognize that behind the politics and the security and legal considerations are children who have known almost nothing but violence and suffering over the last number of years. Let me provide just a little background. Save the Children has been working in Syria since 2014. We have 3 offices in the Northeast, one in Derek, one in Hasake, and one in Raqqa. And we operate both in displacement camps and urban areas. Save the Children delivers child protection, education, nutrition, and WASH programs. And our services reach the children and families of Syrian IDPs and host communities, Iraqis, as well as foreign families with links to ISIS. We believe that there are more than 40 nationalities of women and children in Northeast Syria, and despite attempts to come up with a clear breakdown by nationality, there is no definitive data available. As you know, many children and families lack documentation that verify their nationalities because these documents might have been confiscated or destroyed or just lost in the chaos of flight. And children born under ISIS control might not have had their births registered at all. Unaccompanied or orphaned children face even greater barriers, often lacking both documentation and caregivers. And due to the divorce or the death of their husband during the conflict, it's actually not unusual to meet women whose children each have a different father from a different country. And in other cases, due to the prevalence of sexual violence and rape, women or girls may not actually know the nationality of the father of their child. And so the lack of civil documentation means that foreign children are at a greater risk of statelessness and the denial of their basic rights and services. So Al-Hol camp is really the most widely known camp where foreign women and children reside. This camp is run by representatives of the Autonomous Administration of Northeast Syria and is organized per population profiles with Syrians, Iraqis, and foreign nationals separated into different parts of the camp. Foreign families are located in an area called the Annex that is guarded by security forces, and there are around 10,000 foreigners in the Annex, around 8,500 children. 50% of those children are under 5 years old. Our core work in the Annex is case management, which is similar to social work in Europe. And our case management staff build relationships with children and caregivers, are able to identify vulnerable children, and then provide them with targeted support. And I can tell you that every child in the Annex is vulnerable. Ever since the events of early 2019, it is a challenge to keep up with the demand for support. We have cases of children who have suffered physical and sexual violence, children who are malnourished, sick, or orphaned, and have untreated war injuries. And we have many cases of teenage girls who are now mothers. One of our key concerns is mental and emotional well-being. The children exhibit signs of extreme stress and trauma. Much of this is due to the high levels of violence that they were exposed to while living under ISIS control, but it is compounded by the living conditions in the camp, and certainly COVID-19 has not helped. In the extreme heat of summer, children suffer from dehydration. In the winter, the camp regularly floods and children remain wet and cold. Children live in a state of fear. The primary request from residents is for health services in the Annex. There are women giving birth in tents with no medical help available. Children don't have access to fresh food and face the lasting consequences of malnutrition, which for children under 2 can be irreversible. Dental care is not available, leaving children in severe and untreated pain. and referrals for medical treatment outside of the annex are all but impossible. Save the Children is establishing temporary schools in the annex, and we've managed to overcome many operational challenges, including the provision of appropriate security measures to set up safe structures and facilities. And one fixed site is up and running with child protection and education programs already. In another phase of the annex, we have had to pause our construction temporarily to engage a bit more intensively with the residents to gain their acceptance. And while some women do welcome the addition of a school for their children, there are others who oppose it. And so we really tread carefully to explain our approach and tailor our activities. We have focused on community acceptance and gaining trust, and this is paying off. Save the Children also runs 2 centers for unaccompanied children, with around 40 foreign children receiving 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care at any given time. And in some of the cases, we are in touch with children's extended family, mainly grandmothers in their countries of origin, and our staff are able to facilitate video chats in an effort to maintain family links. And we have worked directly with some governments to support the repatriations of orphans in our care. The other camp where foreign families are is Roj camp, and Roj is much smaller with a total foreign population of around 2,000. And the environment in Roj, while certainly not healthy for children, is more stable because it's very tightly controlled by the camp administration. Similarly, we deliver a range of education and child protection services, including running another 24/7 care center for unaccompanied children. And we've also recently added nutrition counseling for mothers of young children. As you can imagine, the affordability of healthy food is an issue, especially for foreign families who are not allowed to work in the camp. And our nutrition counselors say that some foreign mothers can only afford to give their children meat and eggs once a month. There is a huge demand for education from children in the camp. Actually, in a recent visit, we were approached by 4 foreign teenage girls, and they said they had a very important issue to raise with Save the Children management. It seems that they had completed the entire set of curricula that we offer in the school and were now relearning the same subjects. They demanded that we offer more challenging classes, and as a French girl said, "I want to be an architect when I go back to France, so I need to keep learning. I don't want to fall behind my peers." And for a humanitarian worker, this is really a great challenge to have, and we're glad to report that we were indeed able to find a way to introduce higher level curriculum. You may also know that Roj has recently been expanded to add a new extension, and there is an ongoing transfer of up to 400 foreign families from the Al-Hol Annex and detention facilities. And Save the Children has already begun scaling up its work. Our case management teams are on the front line engaging with new arrivals to identify those at most risk. And as expected, we are seeing high levels of distress and malnourishment. The third location where there is a population of foreign children is the Huri Rehabilitation Center near Kamishli. And this is a center for teenage boys with affiliations to ISIS, whether they are Syrian, Iraqi, or foreign. There are around 30 foreign boys from a dozen different nationalities of just over 100 boys in the center. And many of these boys were trained by ISIS to be fighter themselves or provide logistical support. And these boys may have been identified either on the battlefield or at screening points. I mean, more recently, several teenage boys were actually separated from their families in Al-Hol Annex and transferred to the Huri Center, having then been cut off from contact with their families in the camp. And while the center is structurally safe and secure and the staff are committed to supporting the boys' well-being, there is no plan for what to do with the foreign boys, and there are certainly no legal assistance mechanisms available to them. Many of the boys have war injuries that need to be treated, yet specialized medical care is just not an option. Save the Children is actively engaged in the Huri Center in an effort to provide more sustained psychosocial aid and case management, including family tracing. This is a challenge, and center management is more keen to receive material assistance, including even the building of an additional center to house more teenage boys. The final area where foreign children are being kept is in SDF prisons. And we know that there are children as young as 9 years old in these locations being kept alongside adult men. We have recently been able to conduct interagency assessment in several of these facilities that hold foreign children and are providing some small-scale immediate relief to the boys. But clearly there are grave protection risks for children being detained in such prisons. So what needs to be done and what is actually possible in this context? There's really two elements to focus on. One is meeting the urgent humanitarian needs for children and families inside the camps today, and the other is repatriation as soon as possible. In the immediate term, deteriorating security in the camp needs to be addressed, and humanitarian agencies can scale up if additional funding is made available. It takes time and effort to establish relationships with this community, but it is possible. The infrastructure in the annex, particularly the water and sanitation facilities, desperately needs to be improved. Mental health and psychosocial support to children needs to be built into existing interventions wherever appropriate and possible. Now is the time to help these children learn, play, and recover. We know that sustained exposure to violence and adversity, what we call toxic stress, can have lasting negative effects into adulthood. And it is not in anyone's interest for these children to grow up with serious and chronic health problems or be vulnerable to exploitation by radical groups. But what we are providing is a Band-Aid and keeping the population alive. The sustainable solution is, of course, the repatriation of these children and their mothers to countries of origin, where there are structures and systems that can support and oversee them. And this is not only a moral and in some cases legal imperative, but it's also strategic in the long run. For children, this means an environment where they not only survive, but can finally feel secure and achieve their potential within a wider family and society. And preserving family unity is of utmost importance. Children should be repatriated with their mothers. It is not a fair question to ask a mother, either we take away your children or they continue to live in this degrading, inhumane camp. For many children, their mother represents the only stability they have known in their short life. Let me finish by going back to Dilber from Azerbaijan. She actually started to work in Save the Children's child-friendly space and was grateful for any chance to escape the reality of growing up in a desolate camp. But in October of 2019, the resurgence of fighting caused a mass exodus from that camp. And once again, Dilber, her child, and her siblings were on the run in search of safety. And unfortunately, we have lost contact with her, and we can only hope she eventually finds the protection and peace that has been absent in her life. But one of the last things that Dilber said to us was this: to the people of Azerbaijan, I'd like to say, please take us home. Our parents destroyed our lives. We are only children and have done nothing wrong. Our father was killed by ISIS, and I was forced to have a baby by a fighter when I was still a child. Nobody hates ISIS more than me. Children of foreign nationalities in Syria are innocent victims of the conflict and must be treated as such. Dilber, like thousands of other children, has endured enough suffering. She is ready to go home. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marshall. That was an exceptional presentation. It really gives us an insight into how difficult the scale of the challenge that we're facing in Northeast Syria and the real toxicity of the environment that children are experiencing. It's really, it really needs to be discussed, and hopefully this conversation can shed some light on these issues. Our second speaker is Mr. Munir Mamadzadeh. Mr. Mamadzadeh is the UNICEF representative to Uzbekistan, where he is responsible for managing UNICEF's cooperation with the Uzbek government. He has over 13 years of experience with UNICEF, which offers him a strong base of knowledge and a position to understand the challenges facing the repatriation of children. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Mamadzadeh. Mr. Mamadzadeh, Uzbekistan has been repatriating children and women from Northeast Syria for the past 2 years. Could you reflect on Uzbekistan's experience of repatriation and provide us an insight into how UNICEF is involved and what assistance it's providing.
Thank you so much, Cooper. Let me start by thanking Angela for the excellent presentation, which actually leads to a very interesting kind of follow-up and transition to what happens to children once member states decide to repatriate them. If you allow me, before giving specific details on the experience in Uzbekistan, I wanted to highlight a couple of key principles that we are promoting as UNICEF, and I'm sure there is a common understanding and interpretation of these principles among partners, including Save the Children and others. So basically, we as UNICEF promote the fact that states have the duty under the Convention on the Right of the Child both to repatriate children who are citizens of their countries, but also take steps to prevent children of their citizens from becoming stateless. And there is also, as we have seen in the presentation, a renewed sense of urgency for national governments to safely repatriate foreign children before it is actually too late, so that they can receive adequate care and be safe from violence and abuse. So many countries have repatriated hundreds of children, both from Syria but also Iraq. And in some cases, those children were unaccompanied or even given only possibility to be repatriated by themselves. And therefore, states are encouraged and should promote family unity by repatriating children together with their families, and also making sure that unaccompanied and separated children are supported with family tracing reunification, and also, as much as possible, prevent their longer-term institutionalization in their home countries. So children in all circumstances, in our opinion, and women at large must be viewed as victims of armed conflicts and this situation that they ended up finding themselves. And of course, first and foremost, all children, irrespective of their background, should be treated as children and primarily as survivors of grievous violations of their rights. And this should be always, they should be always referred as children, and in any decisions affecting their lives, the best interest of the child principle should always be a primary consideration. And this is what international legal standards actually are expecting from the member states to be applied. And these standards in no condition can be lowered or differently applied to this particular group of children. So as it was already mentioned, around 90% of foreign children are under the age of 12, and even 50% are under the age of 5. And there are at least 60 unaccompanied foreign children identified. So these are the latest figures that we have as UNICEF. And all the children are missing, and some are in the detention facilities, as we have heard, with very limited access to services. Another principle that we globally promote is that children, especially those under the minimum age of criminal responsibility, should not be detained, investigated, screened from crimes, or persecuted. And individuals, including children, should never be detained or interrogated based on their family's conduct or suspected or actual affiliation. So children shouldn't be detained or persecuted solely for their association or membership in any armed group, as recruitment by armed groups in a grave violation of children's rights. So also we globally promote that those who actually reach the age of criminal responsibility, they have to be considered throughout the very strong focus on child-specific due process and minimum standards, but based on their age, needs, specific vulnerabilities, and with respect to internationally recognized juvenile justice and fair trial standards. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, family support is the key in that process, especially once children and families are reintegrated. So community-based integration and rehabilitation program that would also eliminate any stigma or isolation to support their recovery is the key. So UNICEF has decades of experience supporting children who have experienced the worst forms of violence to successfully recover and reintegrate into their communities. And this is what we are applying, actually, this experience in cases when it comes to successful repatriation and reintegration. And we are there to provide support to the states in repatriation and reintegration initiatives through information on repatriation in line with humanitarian principles, technical expertise and training on child protection, case management, mental health and psychosocial support, community-based reintegration, and services to address gender-based violence for children and families affected by this situation. So direct support also related to the system strengthening, because what we try to promote in the countries also that this caseload should be considered as a part of the broader child protection work, and that mental health again and social support services should be available to all vulnerable groups, including those who are actually repatriated and considered as returnees. So coming back specifically to the experience of Uzbekistan, which was actually documented globally as one of the best practices in terms of the way government of Uzbekistan handled so far repatriation and reintegration processes. Therefore, UNICEF commends Uzbekistan on its swift action to repatriate children, and in doing so they have really recognized the status of children as victims and committed to community-based integration and family-centered approach. So UNICEF has worked with children affected by armed conflict, as I mentioned, for a number of years, including in the region. And basically our evidence is that we have to do everything possible for normalization and the restoration of their childhood. But this cannot happen again while they're in the conflict zone. And therefore, as it was explained by the Save the Children, the situation in camps remains dire, and therefore we still promote and advocate for the government of Uzbekistan to repatriate remaining number of women and children from Syria as soon as possible. And according to our estimates, there are around another 200 women and children still in Syria. But we helped actually national and local authorities to make sure that the reintegration process will be managed appropriately, and reintegration of women and children starting from 2019, both from Iraq and Syria, through introducing community-based reintegration programs would be successful. Especially for children returning from armed conflict zones, UNICEF supported the government with the implementation of best interest assessment process and enabled continuity of care for children. So UNICEF also provided technical support and financial assistance to the government in family tracing, actually before even arrival of women and children, and reunification, as well as identifying interim solutions for their accommodation and temporary replacement, especially for the unaccompanied children return from Iraq. So psychologists from different government institutions, but also social workers from civil society organizations were trained on the norms and standards, as well as mental health and psychosocial support needs for this population. And in close consultation with UNICEF, government established an interministerial working group and adopted an action plan on 2019, and there is another new action plan which is in the process of endorsement, focusing on the new caseloads, recently arrived women and children, to support the integration of repatriated families, so that this close cooperation between UNICEF and the government during the repatriation and the integration process is managed in a way that would allow reflect on good practices and also disseminate these good practices to other countries. Uzbekistan's experience was referred a number of times within the region as well. So we were approached by neighboring countries to study more the success case, but also Uzbekistan's experience was presented in the UN General Assembly side event on 25th of September last year. So the important thing for us is that there is a full ownership and understanding from the government and acceptance of UNICEF recommendations on the key principles that I have outlined earlier on family reunification and identification of family-based alternative care arrangements whenever possible. So on the recent campaign conducted in December 2020, it was already the third campaign of the government for repatriation of women and children. So government of Uzbekistan brought back to Tashkent an additional 25 women and 73 children who had been living in Syria, and this actually resulted in repatriation of relatively big number of women and children. So this 98 cases from December actually are in addition to the early return 156 women and children from Syria, and group of 64 unaccompanied children from Iraq with age ranging from 1.5-year-old to 17-year-old children. So returning children have displayed a remarkable level of resilience, and you will be pleased to hear that most children returning to Uzbekistan and other countries do not display any major signs of clinical trauma, so there are no needs to introduce very specialized and heavy processes for them. In fact, while they have some difficult experience, most are adjusting quickly, catching up in school, and beginning the process of social integration. Some who do require additional support are finally able to receive this in a safe environment while being cared for in a family setting, which is very crucial, as I mentioned earlier. So we, as UNICEF, remain ready to assist other member states in the same way. And we have active cooperation with many of the countries in the region of Europe and Central Asia who have children in northeast Syria to address bottlenecks and support family reunification. So as we support this process, children for both Iraq and Syria caseload, we remain concerned that some actors, though well-intentioned often, approach this issue through a security lens. And this is actually deeply problematic for us, not only because it does not reflect the overwhelming profile of returning children, but also because it further stigmatizes them. So this can directly undermine the social integration we seek to support and know to be in their best interest. So for this reason, actually, Uzbekistan's decisive and clear position on the status of children has been extremely welcome and serves a model of for others seeking to meet their commitments under the Convention on the Right of the Child and other international norms and standards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahmadzadeh. That was really fascinating, and it's really good to hear that there has been some positives coming out of the Uzbek experience, and hopefully that can serve as a model for other states that are still not repatriating their children. Our next speaker is Rustam Azizi from Tajikistan, who is joining us for a second time. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Azizi, and for your close cooperation with the Bulan Institute.
Thank you.
Mr. Azizi is an expert on Islam, religious extremism, and de-radicalization processes. He has been a central figure in the Tajik government's effort to repatriate children from Iraq and intimately knows the details of the operations. Thank you for coming back, Mr. Azizi, and for once again bringing us your wisdom and experience in this area. What has been Tajikistan's experience when it comes to the repatriation of children? And have they faced similar challenges to the Uzbek experience when it comes to rehabilitation and reintegration?
So, thank you very much for inviting me. And first of all, I would like to thank two previous speakers for their really very good presentation, and I actually enjoyed it. And what maybe my presentation or some ideas will not be as optimistic and as positive as was in previous, but I would like to bring your attention on some challenges and some problems on repatriation process, on reintegration process, not only from Tajiki experience, but also from experience of our neighbor country, even Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, from my own experience of studying their experiences. So the first of all, if we would like to talk about repatriation and rehabilitation of citizens of Tajikistan from zones of terrorist activity, so if such kind of background, unlike other countries in the region, Tajikistan has a unique experience on returning its citizens. So last century, on 19th and early 20th, so we had many more refugees and persons displaced by civil war and returned to Tajikistan. The recent number of returnees from Iraq and Syria. So based on that earlier experience, so we do have enough capacity and enough experience which making possible to quickly and successfully carry out some problems. And according to official data, about 2,000 citizens of Tajikistan, if we would like to be exactly 1,898 went to the zone of terrorist activity in Iraq and Syria. It is data of National State Committee of National Security. But according to some independent researchers, the real number may be close to 3,000. And on April 30 last year, a special flight from Baghdad to Dushanbe was organized by the government of the Republic of Tajikistan in collaboration with Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iraq, Kuwait, and other international bodies, UNICEF, and other international organizations. So totally 84 children were brought to their homeland, to Tajikistan. But before it was announced that 89 children should come, but at the very last moment, the mothers of 5 children, they didn't sign the permission. So that's why 84 children were brought out. So, and work nowadays continues to return the remaining citizens remaining in Iraq and as well as in Syria. And according to official data of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, now we do have 575 citizens in Syrian camps, including 286 women and children still based in Syrian refugee camps. And I would like to say some points about the return of radicalized citizens in Tajikistan and victims of radicalization as well. And these 84 returned children, they belong total to 47 families, and only 3 are currently over 16, so they are adults. The mother of most children, 43 in total, they are in Baghdad prisons. And by July of last year, according to our Ministry of Education, 79 out of 84 returned children were placed in 17 orphanages and specialized boarding schools throughout the country. However, siblings were not separated, so they went to the same institute. And 4 of returnees, 3 of which are over 16 years old, and a child of a young lady, they live in special hostel under the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, and they are trained at a vocational school. So children who returned yet they were actually faced such kind of certain stigma, and not all relatives welcome and accept repatriated women and children, as well as local communities. And the fact that children's current parents have not yet been officially deprived of their parental rights, so it makes the adoption process currently legally impossible at all. So the financial side of the issue also important, and according to the surveys, most parents don't want their children to go to the same school with the children who have returned from Iraq. And so it means that we have to work more with communities and with local communities in order to make the reintegration process more successful than it is now. And now Tajiki citizens in Syrian camps, Zubaydullah Zubayzoda, the Tajik ambassador to Kuwait and Iraq, traveled to Damascus in October 2019, where he held talks with representatives of Bashar al-Assad government and armed opposition. And he conveyed that their return should be in the near future. But unfortunately, these plans were not realized because of two reasons. The first is the Turkish military operation in the northern Syria, and also COVID pandemic. But in December 3 and 6 last year, Mr. Zubayzoda again visited Syria, where he held a number of meetings, including on the return of Tajik citizens. So, and for now, interdepartmental working group was created under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and this group is responsible for repatriation processes to coordinate the rehabilitation and integration of returnees. Also, an interdepartmental working group consists of 12 ministries and other agencies was established under the Executive Office of the President of the Republic of Tajikistan. And here's the question, will Tajikistan return its citizens? Here's the official position. It's very clear and strong that definitely yes. And our president said that we are ready to return every single citizen. And the distinguished feature of Tajik approach to repatriation is that no one of our citizens, even those who committed crimes, no one was deprived of citizenship of the Republic of Tajikistan. So, and ensuring the preservation of returnees' constitutional rights. So, and it's very important to mention. And the main issue and challenge in upcoming return of Tajik citizens from Syria camps is the issue of amnesty for citizens, some of whom have been prosecuted as a member of a membership in terrorist organization, and they are officially wanted. They are officially in wanted list, and to be honest, not all of women could be considered as a victims, and it is also a challenge for us, and it is also a question to be discussed because we do have proofs, and even you can find some videos in internet where some women, they were actually inviting our citizens to join them, to join their jihad, etc. So it's also a question to be under the consideration. So since 2015, Tajikistan actually has introduced the automatic amnesty option for individuals who voluntarily returned and reported to the authorities, pending a certain condition. And the amnesty law provides an opportunity for return and rehabilitation of not only women and children, but also non-combatant men. And so, but what is the most important challenges we will face? There were some studies and surveys, and actually, you know, not all relatives, as I mentioned before, want their even relatives to come back. And I personally interviewed some of relatives and say, okay, we want our daughter-in-law to come back with our grandson, but we don't want her other three, for example, children. However, and the situation like that will happen repeatedly. The other question is very important for for countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and other, because we are a pretty traditional society, and even it is not official position, but we can find it in community level that they say the issue of blood is very important, and they said we are not sure about who are their children. However, yes, they are not guilty; they are victims, but it is we have to persuade our communities that about this the very situation. And I have met a lot of posts, not only in Tajik informational space, but in Uzbeki and Kazakh as well, that say, okay, now we are providing the best possibilities for, I beg your pardon, for those bastards, etc. So it's also a question, and we have to ask it, and we have to find solution how to overcome the situation like that. So what is the difference in Tajik experience? Those children who were returned from Iraq, they were only children, so there was not issue of adults. So it is other experience, but with adults, I think we will face some other challenges, and it's also issue to be discussed. But however, I hope that in the near future, we will be able to bring back all our citizens in Syria, in Iraq, I don't know, in Afghanistan, and everywhere, until last single citizen. But the issue of reintegration and repatriation is really a topic to be discussed, and we do have more questions than answers nowadays. So, and here I would like to conclude, and if you have questions about some data or some other information, so I will be so I hope I can provide you. So thank you.